Hi, everyone. I'm Christy Bishop, and welcome to What Nobody Tells Us. I'm your host today, and today's episode is one of those conversations. You have those conversations in life where you just feel like they're going to change everything. They're so deep and poignant and full of meaning and learning and hope and insight and like unbelievable experiences. Like that's exactly what this is. This episode is with an incredible man named Carlos Vasquez. Carlos was, I don't want to give too much of this away because I just want you to dive in, but Carlos was in prison for 18 years. He was in solitary confinement multiple times. The most recently, before he was released from prison for 3 years straight without any breaks. He was a very insecure child, didn't have a lot of confidence, didn't find his voice. And his dad left him and his family at a very young age. And he essentially got into gang life at 13 years old. Carlos details his story with such grace, such articulation, and such depth that I started crying halfway through it because his story just touched me in such an incredible way. And the things that he shared, the things that we have no idea about what happened to him, happened while he was in prison, happened before, while he found an alternate family in these gang members and the good, bad, and the ugly of it. And what he has started since coming out and finding himself in solitary confinement and founding an organization called How to Battle, which helps young men and women who need to find their voice and need to find confidence so they don't go down the wrong path. He helps counsel kids. He helps counsel adults. But he has found his purpose, ironically, in prison. He is an absolute extraordinary human, and I'm so excited for you to listen to this. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you learn, and I hope I did Carlos justice and his story, because there are a lot of, there's some trigger warnings in here around violence, around suicide, and I just want to give people a heads up in case you need that trigger warning. But please enjoy. This is truly one of the most special conversations I've ever had on a podcast. And I really hope that it moves you as much as it moved me. Enjoy. Hi, Carlos. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to have you. Thank you for joining What Nobody Tells Us. You have an incredible story, and there's so much to talk about. I think I sent you like 35 or 40 questions before this.
Yeah, definitely. There's always a lot of questions, but it's no problem.
Thank you. We've got a lot to dive into. So I want to, obviously we'll get to How to Battle and you finding your purpose and just the extraordinary part of your journey there. But obviously we need to go back. We need to go
Right.
backwards a bit. When you were a lot younger, your preteens and teens, even younger than that, did you have any idea as a kid that you would inspire so many people?
But no, I never had no idea because when I was younger, I was the shyest kid in my class. I lacked so much confidence. I was insecure and I would hold a lot of things in. Never had the courage to speak out, even when I really know I should have. So I never imagined today that I'd be using my voice to help people and to inspire people.
What do you think led to that, to you feeling really insecure and really shy as a kid?
Well, my upbringing and a lot of it had to do with my mom sheltering me from the world, wanting to keep me safe, not knowing any better because she went through a lot when she was a kid, and exposed to a lot of things. So she was trying to keep me from that. And my dad was gone along, so we was gone a lot, so he was off to work, so he wasn't able really there to, monitor me and make sure that I was, getting out there and experiencing things at a young age. So I think that had a lot to do with it.
Okay, got it. I know you work so much with kids now around like confidence and using your voice and being exposed to things. So it's really interesting to hear you say that that's kind of how you were brought up. I know that you've done so many interviews about your story, but I can't imagine, I don't want to speak for you that it gets any easier. So I want to make sure that I'm incredibly respectful and just really delicate with a lot of things that are really sensitive and really traumatic that you went through. Everybody has their thing, but you in particular have some pretty extraordinary moments. So I just want to make sure that anything you're not comfortable with, just let me know. I know you said nothing's off limits, but still, you just never know. So to that end, one of the turning points that I know you've mentioned from your story was when you were 13 and when your dad left you and your mom and your sister. Can you talk a little bit about your mindset then and what happened?
Yeah, my father left when I was 13 years old, but before that, when I was about 11 or 12, he started to come around less than he was before. My mother would say he was gone at work, but he just was getting more and more distant from us. And so before, 13, when everything changed, I was going to Catholic school, I was playing baseball. I looked up to my father more than any other man I known. Um, because he was the man that was around me every day. Like I told you, my mother kind of kept me away from a lot of other people, and so he was he was the man I wanted to be like. So when 13 came and found out he was leaving, everything shifted. I started to feel like it was my fault. My mother really didn't explain why he left specifically, so I started to blame myself for a lot of the reason why he left.
Mm,
I held guilt, and I just felt like that my mother disconnected from me as well, and because she
okay.
went into a depression and she was forced to take on multiple jobs, and so my mother and I distanced, and so I felt alone in the world at 13. And my first reaction at that point was to just get away from that environment.
Mm.
That's how I ended up running away at 13.
What about your sister? Is she older or younger than you?
Yeah, I have an older sister. She's 3 years older than me, and shortly after my father left, she got pregnant. She was 16. And
Gosh,
so, yeah, when she got pregnant, that was kind of another reason, why I left too, because
sure.
my mother now took on the responsibility of helping her along her pregnancy and then afterward with another child. And so all that was making me feel like that I had no place there.
Sure.
Yeah, and so, but she went through a lot too. She was feeling the same things and ended up getting involved with the wrong people and got pregnant at an early age.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh. Okay, so your
yeah,
dad's gone, your mom's disconnected, you've disconnected, your sister, was running with the wrong crowd. She got pregnant. You felt
yeah.
isolated and completely alone. Had you hadn't, so you ran away. Did you feel like that was a last resort, or had you been in like had you been exposed to gangs before then? Did you know anyone, or was it running away that introduced you to like any gang members or lifestyle?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, before 13, I didn't know anything about gangs. It was completely foreign to me. And I really just found out about that after I left. And, I ran away and I went into a bad neighborhood. It was like 15 minutes away from where we lived, which was a good neighborhood.
Mhm.
And I ended up going there and I was homeless and
Mm.
um, I ended up sleeping in the back of a car in my friend's apartment complex. And in that environment is where I first got introduced to gang members and the gang life, and they quickly became like my new father figures.
Got it. And so you were still 13 at the time?
Yeah.
And how old were the father figures?
Yeah, they were all older than me. I was the youngest one. One
Okay.
specifically, his name was Chris. He was 3 years older than me. He kind of took me under his wing. It
Mhm.
was kind of like the big brother that I never had. And came from a broken home. Father was in prison.
Mhm.
And we connected within our brokenness. We found
Yeah.
commonality in that and in our struggle to try to find a place in the world as young boys. And so he showed me the streets. He showed me how to sell drugs. He showed me how to rob people. He showed me how to carry a gun, how to use it, all those things when I was 13 years old. And introduced me to marijuana, introduced me to alcohol, and then other drugs later on, which I became addicted to when I was 14 years old.
Were you scared at all? Like, or did you have a voice inside you being like, this is not how I grew up? Like, these are like, what am I doing? Or just, this is my sense of belonging now. This is my new family. So this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I was terrified. I was terrified, but I held it in and I never wanted to show it
Sure.
because of the environment. And that's also kind of when I found out that, love is greater emotion than fear because I quickly loved Chris as like a big brother. I quickly loved the people that embraced me, the lifestyle, and that love is what kept me going and keep and continuously doing criminal behavior
Mm.
over the fear. Because every time I did something that I knew deep down inside wasn't right, I
Yeah.
feared it and I wanted to not do it. but the love that I had for that and them, it overcame that.
It sounds like loyalty and respect as well, those two things.
Yeah, loyalty and respect and all that.
Yeah. Did your mom try to find you at all while you were on the streets?
Yeah, she did. I mean, she ended up finding where I was at, but kind of just let me go, like let me be there. And I think it was because she felt like she couldn't raise me anymore.
Right.
There was no other man around, and so she just felt like, okay, he's with other men now, and although they're bad men,
Right.
they probably do a better job with him than I could.
Oh my gosh. As a
Yeah.
mom, I can't even imagine. Genuinely. I really can't.
Yeah.
So what happened from you at 13 having Chris as this big brother and then some other
Mhm.
ones obviously is kind of a new familial structure for you, good, bad, otherwise, to within the next 3 years becoming the leader of your own gang? Was it the same gang? Was it a different gang? Like how did that happen?
Yeah, so I came into a gang, and then Chris introduced me to that, and I became a part of that gang. And
Mhm.
then by the time I was about Chris was 3 years older than me, so I was about 16 years old. And Chris, remember we were at a drug house, and Chris committed suicide in front of me, and that shifted me from being like a criminal that was selling drugs, and I was also like doing drugs, to a violent criminal after I saw Chris commit suicide, because that's the first time like I had seen somebody that close to me die in such a tragic way. And I developed PTSD from it, which I didn't know at the time. I couldn't sleep. I had nightmares, and I felt like this urge to hurt people. And so I became a violent criminal. And at that point, when I became violent and started doing, bank robberies and stuff like that, and really earning that name in that environment, and that was when I shifted over to eventually starting my own gang at 16 years old.
Mhm.
Outside of the gang, and in gang life, that's kind of like a suicidal thing to do when you try to start your own gang. But at that point I became suicidal, and I didn't really care about living, so I was extreme. Everything I did was extreme. And by the time I was 16, all the way until I went to prison at 19.
First of all, I'm so sorry. Like I know this was years ago, but it doesn't matter at all that you lost your friend in that way. And I know that I read in an interview that you said
Yeah,
that you lost him when to a game of Russian roulette.
yeah,
That
yeah,
is, I like Carlos. I'm so sorry.
yeah.
That's
Thank
just
you, appreciate it.
love doesn't go away, right? Whether it's fear-based love or just love in general. And so I'm sure
Mhm,
just the memory of him. I hope that it lives on in a good way with you.
mhm.
Um, and it makes sense why you went from just a criminal. I mean, it's weird to say just a criminal to a violent criminal, but making those
Yeah.
decisions because of the trauma that you had in you and the rage and the anger and the fear. Like that, it makes sense. When you look back at the armed robbery that eventually or inevitably put you in prison, do you have any thoughts as to why it was that particular moment where things went to the point where it was like you got caught and went to prison, or was it just another criminal act because you were robbing banks, you were doing all these things? Was it just a moment where something went wrong and you guys were in the wrong place at the wrong time with the authorities?
Well, just to touch on like with Chris, like real quick,
Yeah, please.
you know, uh even to this day, like after all the growth that I've been through, like that, some wounds never heal, like, and we just become stronger, and we're able to deal with them. And for me, even to this day, like, it still hurts me because there was a feeling of like it was my fault and a guilt there, and even to this day, because had I had that voice that I told you I never
Uh,
had I had it back then, maybe I said something, maybe I told him not to do it, maybe I stopped him from making that decision, but I didn't. And so that drives me every single day to do what I do, knowing that I cannot allow another person like Chris to give up. And so that literally like pushes me every day. And so but going back to the armed robbery, I was just started to do everything. Like I was doing armed robberies, I was hurting people, and just trying to find a way to channel all the anger and all the frustration and guilt that I was facing. And I ended up robbing some drug dealers, and in the process of robbing these drug dealers, ended up getting caught and going to prison. But it wasn't like a one-time thing. It was an accumulation of things. When I
yeah.
got caught, I had multiple charges on me, and I was facing life in prison ultimately when I was going to court before
Yeah.
trial. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so I want to touch back on Chris just for a second. And
Yeah.
so So you mentioned that Chris committed suicide in front of you, but also during a game of Russian roulette. I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this. Was he actually suicidal and wanting to end it? And you wish you could have said something to say, don't do this? Or was it a game of Russian roulette where he was like, fuck it, I don't even care if this gun is loaded because I want to end it anyway. And if this is my time to go, like, fuck all this shit, I'm done.
Yeah.
Was it a combination of the two?
I think that it was well, this is how I kind of know that he was just done with life, is because when he killed himself, he put two bullets in the gun before he spun the barrel and pulled the trigger. And so he played a couple of times before with one bullet in it.
Got
And
it.
it's like it's like he wanted to kill himself. And even by trying with one bullet, he couldn't do it. So he put two in there, and that's when he killed himself. And
That's
so that's why I say he plays Russian roulette. He was playing Russian roulette, but ultimately when it happened, it was like it wasn't, to me, I didn't feel it was an accident. And
yeah, yeah,
and a lot of people think that it is, like especially his family who wasn't there, but me
yeah,
being there, it was something that just it told me like he was just ready to end it. And he probably would have put three bullets in there if that wouldn't have happened. But
yeah.
um, yeah,
So yeah, he was playing Russian roulette with himself, but he stacked the deck.
yeah,
God, oh my God,
yeah,
again.
exactly.
I'm so sorry. And like you said,
Yeah,
some wounds don't heal.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I can only express my sorrow, truly.
yeah. Appreciate it.
Um, okay. So when you went to court and you were sentenced to prison time, you have mentioned that you thought it was a one-way ticket into prison. Is that because for all the previous charges that you had against you, you thought this was going to be life in prison? And what happened to make that change to reduce the sentence when you went in? Or were you surprised?
Yeah, so I was facing life in prison all the way up until I was about to go to trial. And at the right before trial, the district attorney offered me a plea bargain for 20 years with two strikes.
Mm,
And 20 years with two strikes back in those days, when they would strike you out for anything, for a young guy like me going into prison, that was pretty much a life sentence. And even my lawyer and other people were like that's like a death sentence, that's a life sentence. Because you're gonna have to go in prison and do something, right? You're gonna get
right,
into something, and that's your
right.
third strike. That's life. And so when I went in with that mentality, and everybody that I was running into on my way to prison was telling me the same thing. So I believed it, and I went into prison thinking I would never get out. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna go in there and continue to be this be this person that I've become, this moniker and this identity that I created, continue to build on that, because that's all I have now. That's all I have left. And so I
Yeah.
went in with that mindset.
Okay. And just for audience clarification, when you say you went in with two strikes, those were previous charges against you before you went in. So it was 20 years plus the previous charges.
Yeah, so I got two strikes because I had was on the run, and I had multiple charges that were thrown
Mm,
at me when I got arrested. So for each charge was a strike, which is why I was facing life. I had multiple ones, violent felonies. And
yeah.
so the deal was that, okay, we'll give you two strikes in 20 years.
Mhm.
And the probability of me making it out is, I don't know what it is, but it's really low. Yeah, I ended up going in there, and I was at a young age into
Yeah.
prison with that.
And so were you 19 when you went into prison?
Yeah. Yeah, I was 19 when I went into prison. I fought my case for a year.
Okay.
I went into prison when I was 19.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did you survive the transition to prison versus like gang life on the streets? You said you were committed to this persona of believing at the time that was who you were, just a
Yeah.
violent criminal. So what was your perspective going in, if you can recall?
Yeah, so I knew a lot about prison before I went in, because I grew up in a gang environment where the most respected men were in prison before. So prison was like taking, it's like you're not really going to be fully respected in gang life unless you've been through prison and made it out, because it's another test. It's another way to see if you have it within you to really be at a higher level in the gang life. And so for me, it was like, okay, well, this is the only thing that I haven't proven. And even as a gang leader at the time, it was still that, like, I haven't survived prison. So when I went into prison, I still went in with the mindset as a gang leader, and I eventually became a shot caller in prison.
Mhm.
And in prison is like you have to be violent. So as soon as I went in, I did that. Like I signed up to do everything that I could to prove to everybody else that I was not to be messed with. So it's a way to protect myself, but also a way to continue to build my reputation so that I could eventually become a shot caller in prison. Because in my warped mindset, that's all I wanted to do, was to be a
Yeah.
leader of a criminal organization in some sort, and be respected and be loved and all these things that I thought would come with that. But
Yeah.
it's all fake. But
Yeah.
back then I didn't know it. I didn't know it back then. So
Of course.
yeah,
You've also said, which this has always confused me, if you don't mind trying to at least clarify just for me, that
yeah.
you, so in addition to being a shot caller, you also ran like a criminal organization within prison, making thousands of dollars from your cell. How does one do that in prison? Like, how do you make money in prison? And I'm sorry for my ignorance on this. I just genuinely have no idea.
No, it's actually a very legit question, because it's a whole nother world in prison. And unless you've been in there, you won't really truly understand it.
Right.
But I know that I could say that it's like anything, any area of life, there's potential for it to be manipulated. There's a potential for there to be corruption. And so a lot of the ways you make money in prison is through the people that work there. It's through the correctional officers, it's through the staff, it's through the people that work there.
Okay.
And you people that are desperate for money, people who maybe have been threatened and forced to do stuff. And
Mhm.
then, like anything else, you figure a way to get things that you're not supposed to have, and you sell them. And so
Mhm.
that's that criminal mentality. Like when you have that mentality, you're always looking for a way to, break the law, to do something in some way to either make money or do something against the system. You're
Mhm.
always looking for it. And so yeah, there's ways, but everything starts. The root of it all comes from the staff. you
Yeah. Okay.
know yeah.
No, thank you. That makes a lot
Mm.
of sense. I genuinely had no idea. What
Yeah.
you mentioned, like unless you've been in there, you don't have a clue, right? So what are
Yeah.
given the show is called What Nobody Tells Us, what are some things that you could safely share around what nobody knows about what happens in a prison?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good one, because to this day I still sometimes think about the stuff that happens in there, and I really it baffles me that I actually experienced it. Like seeing somebody, murdered, like literally right in front of you, and then like 5 minutes later everybody's just walking around laughing and just so callous about it. The staff are talking about how it happened. People are worried about if they're going to get their shower, and they just don't even realize that a man got murdered, and then now their family is going to have to hear that they died in prison. It's the callousness, how deep it is. I think people think prison is tough and cold and all that, but they really have no idea. And so I think that it's you see the most evilest stuff in there, like the most evilest things you can imagine that they put in movies you see in prison. But also like another thing, just the flip side of that, is like the amazing people that are in there, the people who just made one mistake, the people who went through trauma and have been through stuff that ended up in there because they made one bad decision, or maybe they just come from a family that was all gang members, so they really didn't have a chance. But some of the greatest people and the greatest minds I've ever met has been in prison. Like
Mhm.
the most educated people I know. I self-educated myself.
Yeah.
So some of the most beautiful people are in prison. And I think a lot of people don't know that. And I think that me as a person now and who I am, that's one of my goals too, is to kind of shift the way people look at people in prison. They're not all bad.
Yeah.
But although some are, and to this day, I wouldn't want a lot of those people to be my neighbor, for sure. And so I'm not saying all people should go free. I'm saying people should stay in prison for the rest of their life,
Mhm.
but don't put everybody together in one category, because there's amazing people that just need help.
Yeah.
So I would say that there's an ugliness there that people really don't understand, evilness, and then there's a beauty in there of amazing people who are the most loyal and would actually give you their last piece of bread. And that's happened to me, where I
Yeah.
didn't have anything to eat, and a man that I didn't even know, offered me his last soup.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's stuff that you like, wow, I can't believe this is happening in prison. But it
Yeah.
does. It does.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to say because it feels like there's a dichotomy everywhere in life, no matter where you look. About there's the evil side and there's the beautiful side, and it really just depends on which side you want to identify with. And I know you went from one to the other.
Right.
Part of that process of going from one to the other was obviously solitary confinement. Um, before getting into kind of how that happened, I think when people who have never been in prison, myself included, think about solitary confinement, or you hear those words, think, oh my God, like it's completely inhumane, no matter what you've done, not you, but somebody in general has done. No access to anything, no access to people, no books, no whatever it might be. Can you clarify like what actually solitary confinement is? Like what is the room like? What is the day-to-day experience like? Just so people have an idea.
Yeah, if I could sum it up in one word before I delve into it, I would say
Yeah.
it's torture.
Yeah.
Um, it's mental torture and physical as well. Um, and I say physical because at some point you just like even to this day, like my eyes will never be the same because
Mm,
when you're in a small confined area like that and you can't look 10 feet past you, eventually your eyes just give out and they eventually, because you're not looking at long distances, you're only
right.
looking within a small sphere. So when you step out of that, your eyes aren't used to that now looking far distances. So it's small things like that as just one example of the physical. I mean, in the mental is like really goes without saying, like we're not meant to be locked up, like, or
Yeah.
in our DNA, we're not meant to be caged up. And so when they cage you up and they put you in a place for 24 hours a day in a small cell that's cold and they don't give you anything but a pair of boxers, and it's cold and they feed you, a small amount of food and then you're not around anybody to talk to and you're staring at a wall and there's no windows and you're just alone with your thoughts and then they limit what you can read because they don't want you to read too much and learn
Yeah.
too much and then the way they look at you every single day when they come by and do count, it's the repetitiveness of that when somebody looks at you like you're a piece of shit for long enough you start to believe it.
Mm,
And so the mental torture is also very very strong and if you're not mentally tough you're not going to make it out the same. You
yeah.
might make it out but you'll never be the same and a lot of people commit suicide and go crazy and get on medication and never come back.
Yeah.
And so anybody who's made it through solitary confinement, I really respect like how strong they are mentally because I know how it is. It can break you. And it took many years for them to stop doing it. And luckily now they're not really doing it. But back then they did. And they put you in there to tell you that you're never gonna get out.
Oh my God.
So
And how many times were you in solitary confinement?
yeah, so with first 10 years I was in prison, I was in solitary confinement, in and out, doing like 6 months at a time, probably about 3 or 4 times. Which was nothing because I had, okay, 6 months in there is nothing, in that my mind back then. But then about, later on after about a decade in, I ended up going in and they told me I was going to be there for 3 years. And so that's where I ended up being for 3 years. And that's where I got to the point where I was ready to commit suicide because
Yeah.
yeah, it just in it's mentally tough as I was then.
Yeah.
Um, no matter what, at some point you're going to be tested like mentally, like, and that's where I got to that point, and I
Yeah.
was ready to end my life.
Okay, so here comes the unbelievable turn in your story, going from complete devastation and suicidal tendencies in solitary confinement. And again, thank you for that description because that is completely inhumane. And I don't understand how you got through that. I really don't. And you almost didn't, like from what you've said in the past. So there was an experience with a chaplain in solitary confinement that really turned everything around for you. But I don't want to say that flippantly. Like it was a moment that gave a glimmer of starting to turn your path around. Can you talk about what that experience was?
Yeah, I remember it's I think about it every single day. I was in solitary confinement. I had already planned how I was going to commit suicide. Um, because in solitary confinement you can't have even the ability to do that. Like they specifically keep any way for you to commit suicide impossible almost because they know it happens so frequently. So I had days to think about how I was going to do it, and in the process of planning that and writing a suicide letter to my mother, a chaplain came by my cell, and back there in solitary confinement, chaplains, every now and then they'll come around and just pass out books and Bibles and cards and stuff like that. Um, and yeah, man came to my cell and he noticed that I was going through something. Um, you know, I had a cold look on my face and I felt like I had no soul. And he came and he asked me to speak to him, and I did, and I listened to him, and he told me that I had a purpose, and he told me to figure out what that was. And he told me to start here, and he gave me a Bible. And so, and he challenged me to keep going. He challenged me not to give up, but to figure out what my purpose was. And that challenge got me through like another day. And I picked up the Bible and I started reading it, driven by this challenge that he gave me. Because, back then with my ego, I feel like there's nothing that I wouldn't take on
Mm-hmm.
if a man challenged me. So he knew exactly what to say and what to say exactly when I needed to hear it. And it got me through days. And then I started to read and I started to gain hope, and I started to get out of that suicidal way of thinking. And then I started to work on myself and understand like why I had got to that point, why I was having, these nightmares and all this. And I started to like spend every single day just reading every book I could read and figuring out what was going on within me. And, for the last 2 years in solitary confinement, that's what I did. I worked on myself relentlessly every single day from the moment I got up till I went to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately I made it out of there. That's where I transformed my life, was in solitary confinement.
Was there anything, and again, like to
Yeah.
describe 2 years in 30 seconds is impossible, right? Like, and the journey that you really truly went through mentally and physically. When the chaplain gave you the Bible, was there anything in particular as you started to read that? Assuming, I don't know if you had any other books in your cell at the time, what was it about the Bible in particular that started to give you that type of hope?
It was the Bible because it took me back to when I was a kid in Catholic school.
Mm,
And every time I picked up that Bible, I remembered being that kid, with the dreams to be a baseball player, and loving my life and my family and not a worry in the world. And I was like, how did I get from that to who I am today?
yeah,
Like this destructive force that was hurting so many people, like, and not just hurting them like directly for myself, but now like in a position where I can tell somebody to hurt somebody and they would do it,
yeah,
and that comes like with power comes huge responsibility. And I was yielding my power in such a devastating way. And I realized that, and I was like, it wasn't meant for me to be that. And
yeah.
so that's what made it different, is I connected a good time in my life to it.
Mm,
And then the power of it, I believe there's power in that word.
yeah.
And so the power in it, the challenge, connecting it with the time of my life when everything was good, and then that gave me a glimmer of hope to keep going forward. So yeah.
What were you able to request other books? So like when you started to work on yourself and you started to see a vision for yourself, were there specific things that they did? Because you said it's very hard to get things in solitary confinement, right? Like they are specific about what they give you and what they withhold from you. When they started to notice an inevitable difference in you and your perspective and maybe your interactions with the guards coming around, did they loosen up the ability to then give you things? Were you requesting specific things? Did they recommend things? Like, how did you get your hands on some of this stuff to help you?
Yeah, one of the books, right after I started reading the Bible, one of the books that I found. And it's hard to explain how things just started to happen, because I believe it was like, greater than my own understanding. Like, and it's like if you put something in the universe, you put something out there,
Yes.
eventually you attract it to you. If you put good out there, you're going to attract it to you. And if you put a dream out there and you've worked toward it, things happen and doors open to align with that dream. And
Mhm.
so once I changed my life and I got into that mindset that I wanted to work on myself after reading the Bible, I started to find opportunities to find books. So, like I would eventually be able to like talk to a correctional officer and ask them like, hey, can you give me some books from the library? And any other time a correctional officer would never do it. But I
Mhm.
think that when, like I said, when the universe knows like you're onto something, it allows the right people to come into your life and give you those opportunities. And so I
Mhm.
remember one of the books I got shortly after was Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
Mhm.
And that book had a profound impact on my life. And I got that book from one of the correction officers that went and got it and brought it to me.
Mhm.
And that like sparked something in me too, because it showed a man who had been through something worse than me,
Yeah.
but overcame it, kept a positive outlook on life, and overcame it. Not only overcame it, but wrote a book to inspire millions of people. And I'm like, well, why can I change my life, get out of prison and do the same. And
Mhm.
so that sparked it, and then that sparked my interest in psychology because he was a psychologist. And then that's when I know that, okay, I want to learn about psychology because I know that with psychology, I could learn why I developed PTSD,
Mhm.
why I had developed these changed the way of thinking from when I was just a kid to now who I am. And so became interested in that. And then, um, started to learn about it. And then started to figure out ways to work on myself. And then
Mhm.
that's when I started working on my book. Yeah.
Incredible. Do you remember any specific moments across that time where you divined some of these answers or like divined your purpose for yourself? Because like, were there any like visceral, like with kids, it's like the movie Inside Out. They've got core
Yeah.
memories, right? Like, were there any core memories that you're like, oh, this is when I was in flow, like that flow state you're kind of
Yeah.
talking about? Do you have
Yeah.
any recollections about any of those?
Yeah. I remember, one day I was sitting on my bunk and I was, taking my life apart and I was analyzing my life and I was identifying all of my strengths and all of my weaknesses. And in the process of doing that, I realized that one of my strengths was in leadership, and that one of the strengths, which I first thought was a weakness of mine, was actually my voice and my ability to speak and people inspire people and people listen. And so I was like, I know those are two things that I can now take, and use in a positive way instead of a negative way. And that was a moment right there that I knew that it's like it excited me because me trying to figure out what my purpose was on this earth, I didn't know, because I've caused so much destruction. I didn't feel like I had any talents. I feel like I was worthless, but I knew that I had that at least to get started. And so I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start using my voice and I'm going to start using my leadership in a positive way. And maybe from that will unfold a purpose. And so that moment right there helped me get through a lot of time and a lot of self-doubt and a lot of negativity and all that was coming along with my transformation. Transformation just doesn't happen easily. You're constantly battling, mentally with I'm gonna go back to that life. In that life, you have all these things in your head telling you that no, you can't be anything but what you are.
Mhm.
You'll never be anything but that. You'll never make it out of prison. All these doubts. But I felt that, I was gonna end my life in that state. And
Mhm.
so what do I got to lose? If I change my life and I get killed, then at least I died on my own terms, the man I wanted to be. And
Mhm.
so that kept me going and pushing forward, discovering, what my whole mission in life was.
Mhm. And like pushing through all those limiting beliefs, which it
Yeah.
sounds like they were completely overwhelming.
Yeah.
So, were you released from solitary confinement early, or did you serve the entire 3-year sentence, even though everyone noticed that you were really doing an incredible job working on yourself?
Yeah. So I did the full 3 years. And because when I first was sent back there, they give you a specific date you have to do.
Okay.
But you don't just get out. You have to go in front of a panel of people, and then they say, okay, well, 3 years is up. We can let you out, or we can extend it,
Oh my
which
God.
is why a lot of people end up in solitary confinement for 20, 30 years because they couldn't pass the panel, and the panel is not going to let you out if you're still a gang member and if you're still, involved in that. And they don't need proof. All they need to
Right.
know is a feeling. And so
Right.
when I went in there and I spoke to the panel and my 3 years came up, and I told them about my newfound life and all this stuff that I had accumulated. They at first they didn't believe me because it was like he's being manipulative. He's a shot caller in prison. We can't
Yeah.
trust him. But ultimately, you know, uh, God, whoever, it worked out my way and they let me out. They gave me a chance and I got out. And, that's when I started my journey in general population for my last
Yeah.
4 years until I got out.
So, okay, so you've changed, right? But Gen
Right.
Pop has not. So,
Right.
how did the other prisoners who knew you as one way respond to you? Unless I don't know if it works this way, had any murmurs been making their way out of solitary confinement via the correctional guards at all? Like, oh, Carlos is working on himself. He thinks he's better than us. Whatever. Like, what was the response from the prisoners when you were released back to Gen Pop?
No, nobody knew. Nobody knew about my change. And had anybody heard of anything? It's kind of like people that are back there in that situation. They like I told you, some of them lose their mind. So if
Yeah.
anything did get back out to general population, there's probably like, well, Carlos probably just lost his mind.
Yeah.
He's not thinking straight. That's not him. But but
Yeah.
ultimately, nobody specifically knew. I knew, and I knew that when I got out, I was going to have to deal with that. And so I did. And so when you go back into general population from solitary confinement as a shot caller, you automatically pull up, and you become a shot. You run the yard. So that
Mm,
means like when because it's almost like you're on a higher level since you get out of solitary confinement.
yeah.
It's like an initiation to the higher level. So whoever was the shot caller on the yard that day, as soon as I walked out of solitary confinement, that became my position. And
Wow.
so when I became my position, and now I'm approached with the responsibility, and I go and I tell them that my change. I tell them that I'm not. I didn't tell them that I wasn't living that life anymore. And
Hmm.
and what I did was I started to tell them that there was a better way. I started to tell them that we're better than this, and I started to do the things that I knew could be done within a human being because I did it within myself. And a lot of people didn't they weren't ready to hear that. And
Yeah.
so I got stabbed twice shortly after that, because when you're in a position like that, you can't just walk away.
Hmm.
So I got stabbed 2 times. um I stitched myself up in my cell, and continued on to change. I no longer was the shot caller on the yard for that, but
Yeah.
that was my way out. That was my what I needed to do to get out of that, and I did. And shortly after, I started to formulate self-help groups for lifers on the yard. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So I didn't know that part. So tell me more about that. Because I mean, I'm so curious about all of it's like the neuro pathways that we talked about, like in the previous like pre-call,
Yeah.
that are so prevalent. And anyone who's been doing something or experiencing it, like a certain identity or persona for a very long time, like I'm curious how you overcame triggers and PTSD to not just join back into that life, but then also to develop self-help groups for prisoners on the yard. Like, tell me more about that, because I'm sure that also helped keep you going, but that is extraordinary.
Yeah. So while I was in solitary confinement, the thing that helped me to overcome a lot of the trauma, including the PTSD, was the 5 principles that I used in my life when I was back there. And then when I got out of solitary, I started formulating self-help groups around those 5 principles to help other people. And the 5 principles are the ones I ended up writing in my book. And the first one is purpose. And it's just figuring out what your purpose is, what your why is. And at some point in my life, my only purpose was my mom, just to get out to her, to make it out so that I can take care of her, because I didn't care about myself at that point. That was like one of my purposes before I discovered what my true purpose was. So I
Mhm.
try to do that within those groups to help the guys figure out a why. What's your purpose right now? And it doesn't need to be a huge thing. It could just be to make it home, to hug my kids, something small. The second thing is to develop a routine, a solid routine of just doing positive things every day, reading, things to help you mentally, things to help you physically, working on yourself. So develop that within a routine. The third thing is find something that inspires you every day. So
Mhm.
for me, my inspiration was people that were getting out of prison and being successful. My inspiration was Viktor Frankl. My inspiration was people who overcome horrible situations and get out there and do something amazing. And then the fourth is confidence, building your confidence. And you do that by stepping out of your comfort zone, challenging yourself, and just being in competition with the man you were yesterday. So I started to teach that. And then the last is continuously educating yourself, because education helped transform my life. And it wasn't college, it was me working on myself every day, studying, learning. So I instilled that in those guys, like, look, we don't have colleges here yet. We don't have none of that, but we could still educate ourselves. And so those are the 5 principles that I was teaching on, and helping a lot of people. And it's crazy because to this day, like, many of those lifers are home right now and we're still friends, and they tell me that I like my change and sparked their change, and that's when I knew I needed to get out and start How to Battle. So
I was going to ask, so to see like what kind of changes did you start to see in some of these lifers, and did you have to convince any, like how did people decide to join a self-help group if it was frowned upon to start to change your life? Was anyone afraid? Like how did people start to join this group? Because the principles are incredible and so true for anyone facing any sort of adversity, or looking for their purpose or to change their life, but particularly for prisoners who could have been seriously injured or attacked for doing this. How did that happen?
Well, it happened because of who I was. Everybody knew me that I was a shot caller. Everybody knew that,
Mhm.
you know, that in at some point in my life, I was either just as guilty of whatever as they were,
Mm.
or worse, and they knew that. And so I think what it was is like if they cease, what I noticed is a lot of people deep down inside they want to change, especially people in prison. They need somebody to help them start, and they need to see somebody do it first,
Yeah.
like to believe that it could be done. And although there was other groups and there was other religious things going on in prison, the people that were running those things were people that weren't never literally lived that life. They were people that just went to prison for other things, weren't gang members, weren't haven't dealt with murder and all that stuff. And so when they saw the change happen within me, a lot of them felt compelled to now take a chance. Like, well, if Carlos can change, and if Carlos is this new person now with this new energy, and he's able to have this hope, and like, all right, I'm a guy, and I respect him, and they like I got that respect, and so they're like, okay, let's try it. And then when they came into the groups and we started to work together as groups, and they started to see changes within themselves, and they saw that they knew that I had went through my, got stabbed, and that's how serious I was about my new life. They felt like they could change, and they could eventually have the life that they ultimately want. It's just they were afraid to start. And so it's like sometimes you have to take one for the team, so to speak. You
Mhm.
have to sacrifice, and people do it all the time. Look at all the great men and women in our history that sacrificed for us to be here. And I'm not saying I'm on that level, but I believe within our own world, our small world, if we're able to make sacrifices, sometimes we can inspire others to
Mhm.
make ultimate huge changes in their life. And I think that's what it was. I think that it was because it was me, and I had been through what I've been through.
Yeah.
Because if I had just been a regular person, it probably wouldn't have impacted. So
Yeah. Why believe you?
yeah,
Like, no, that's incredible. I love that. You mentioned that you thought your purpose, like before, because you didn't care about yourself at the time, was your mom.
yeah.
So what kind of role did your mom and your sister play, or relationship did you have with them across the time that you were in prison?
Yeah, so after I went to prison, I was writing my mom and my sister, keeping in touch with them as much as I can. Because I mean, I always loved them, even
Mm,
from when I
yes.
left at a young age, I always loved them. And I knew they had been through a lot. And I knew eventually, after I started to learn more, that, hurt people. And, my mother is not to blame for who I became. It was because she was so hurt and she didn't know how to deal with it. She had her own wounds. And so our relationship was not really close while I was in prison. I mean, even to this day, when I'm around my mother and my sister, sometimes it's like we're just and maybe it's prison, 17 years of prison. Like I just feel like we're just different people, but I
Mm,
still love them. So I do everything I can to show them through my actions that you could be positive and you could live a happy life. And in some way, I hope that I could inspire that in them.
mhm.
But prison, no matter what, like prison is gonna have it's gonna have its repercussions no matter what. Like you can't deny that no matter how much you've changed. It causes a lot of pain within families. It causes a lot of separation. It causes mental wounds on people,
Mm,
in all kind of ways. And so I think that my relationship, we're trying to rebuild right now. I would say
mhm.
I've been out 2 years. We're trying to rebuild,
Yeah.
and I'm working on that all the time, every day, so that one day I could feel like we're back together
Yeah.
as a family. So
Yeah. I mean, I commend you for doing that, because even if they weren't in prison, if they don't
yeah,
have the same positive mindset, it's hard to come along with it, and sometimes hard to believe it if you're not in a position to really adopt that yourself.
yeah,
Oh, yeah, I wish you the best in that. I'm sure it will. But like you
yeah,
said, it takes time. What is it? Time heals all wounds. And I don't necessarily believe that, but sometimes it dulls the ache,
yeah,
the
yeah,
ache's not as sharp anymore. So just,
yeah,
yeah, you're doing the right thing. So you
yeah,
got paroled on June 25th of 2021. So just over 2 years ago.
yeah.
Congratulations. Like that's
Thank you.
a huge anniversary. And you said that you walked out of prison with a purpose, with a mission, and clear about who you were and what you ultimately wanted to accomplish. Um, your purpose was your mom. What is your purpose now?
Yeah, yeah. So, my purpose now is to just inspire people and to give them hope, and to be able to coach them, to be able to teach them into becoming the best versions of themselves, to help them, realize that there's greatness within them, because there's so many people that, walk around every single day that aren't happy, that aren't feeling fulfilled, that aren't feeling like they're living their purpose. And so my mission is to be able to help people do that, specifically young people. And so that's kind of my focus,
Mhm.
because I know, like, we all know how important that is. The young people in this world, there's nobody more important than that for us as a, just a species, and but just in general, like, that's everything. So, because that's where all the change happens, is when you're young. When you're,
Yeah.
young, you could make one decision like I did, and be gone, or you can make a good decision and be happy. And so I try to work with the youth, and I do that through my coaching and through my speaking,
Mhm.
and through other avenues. Just anything I do, I always look for a way to inspire people to do something positive and to transform their life in a good way.
How did you start doing that when you were paroled? Like, how did you reassimilate with that purpose in mind? And like, how did you start actually acting on it?
Yeah, so I started acting on it every day. Like, even when I first got out of prison and I didn't have a job and I couldn't get hired, despite I had got a college degree, and everything in prison, my last 4 years, in psychology, and then I educated myself. Didn't matter, I got turned down for 4 jobs when I got out. And so, but it didn't matter, because everybody that I would meet in life, everybody that I would talk to, every day I felt like that I was fulfilling my purpose, because in some way I was helping them, whether it was through me talking to them one on one and giving them something of some type of hope. They were going through something, giving them some guidance, giving them some tools, giving them some knowledge and wisdom, and helping them. And so I was doing that. And then eventually I got a job part-time at a nonprofit organization, that was helping prisoners. And so I started working there, and I was writing letters to the men and women inside of prison throughout California.
Mhm.
And they were opening up in these letters, and I would write them back and continue to help them and guide them and coach them. And then eventually I left that job because, it paid minimum wage, and it was part-time. So I needed to find something else. And I went and I started to, at that point I was like, I gotta just start my own thing. I gotta find the courage within me to start my own thing,
Mhm.
because I felt that's where the leadership came in. I just needed to be a leader. And so I started How to Battle from that point. So
That's amazing. It's funny how you kind of straddled, even though you were
yeah.
out, you straddled the inside out to continue your message and your inspiration to people going through it because you knew what it was like. But
Yeah.
then, like, it's so interesting to start your own thing with such a clear purpose and such a clear mission. You had to do that. Like, in my mind, it's as clear as day. You had to do it because your perspective is absolutely so unique that you couldn't go to someone else's company and say, "Oh, I'll speak, be an inspirational speaker under your own brand, like, or under their brand." You had to do it for yourself. So what led you to choose the name How to Battle? And also I want to hear more about your book too, obviously, which is incredible. But so what led you to name it How to Battle, and what do you focus on? You said you the youth, but like what's your, your audience, your mission, all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So How to Battle came because, when I first got out of prison, I had to learn how to set up an email. I
Mhm.
had to learn how to use my phone. I had to learn how to do everything, because I was gone for so long. And when I went in, they didn't have smartphones. They didn't have technology like they have now. And so I started to how to everything. And I knew that I wanted to be that if somebody got out of prison, or if a kid was looking for some help, like how to battle through something, how to battle through, my addiction, how to battle through my self-doubt, how to
Mhm.
battle through my insecurities. I wanted to be that platform where people can go to and receive the help that they need to battle through, whatever it is they're going through. And we all battle through something. And that's something that I realized when I got out, that even people who are highly, successful, financially, they battle through something. I mean, one of the guys I coach is a millionaire, and he's unhappy, and he's dealing with addiction, and he's dealing with a son who's on drugs. And I realized that, like, you don't have to come from a bad situation to battle through something. And so I found there's value in, being able to help people overcome the battles they undertake in life. And
Mhm.
so that's where I got the name. And then, my focus was the youth, because naturally that's kind of like where I went toward.
Mhm.
And it started from me speaking at a school, a continuation school in LA, to troubled youth. And I started speaking there, and I realized, the impact that I had on them just from speaking. And then the teacher asked me to come back and do a workshop, and I created a workshop and I did that. And then I knew like that I had a voice and an ability to help the youth that in so that nobody else can do as far as the teachers and staff,
Mhm.
because they couldn't identify with these youth that come from those neighborhoods that where they're filled with gangs and they come from gang families. And so I knew I wanted to be able to create something to help them.
Mhm.
And so that's my focus. But it's transitioned into me, actually working at LMU, working at other universities,
Mhm.
to companies and organizations, going back into prison and working with the youth and stuff. So it's expanded to help people from everywhere that's going through something. So uh,
When you say these things out loud, how do you feel when you like when
yeah.
you're reflecting on this? Like you're what you created is incredible and helping so many people on such a wide spectrum. Like how do you feel when you're saying these things?
Yeah, I just feel grateful because I'm able to do it. Like I was talking the other day to a foster group home, and a kid was 12 years old and he was telling me how his mom died 2 years ago and he was in foster group home because nobody wanted to take him in, none of his family. And you know, it's like just to be able to like, realize that like in some way, if I could tell him something like to help him, that's something that, you just can't explain.
Yeah.
And I know the power of words because, I always go back to the chaplain that told me what I needed to hear when I needed to hear it. And that ultimately sent me on the trajectory to alter my life. And now I'm helping other people alter theirs. And so I know the power of words. And so when I'm able to tell him my story and give him encouragement and hope and advice, maybe, I could be that chaplain for him. And so that's kind of like makes me feel grateful, blessed. I mean, and just it's really like surreal in a way sometimes because, I technically, I shouldn't even be here. If you look at it from a statistic point, but also I wasn't even supposed to be released from prison until 2024.
Yeah.
Um, according to the courts, according to my paperwork. I got out 3 years early because I changed my life, and I transitioned and I started to do good. And so I didn't expect to even be here, like speaking to you today. I'm really not supposed to be out yet. And it happened, but it shows that if like you start to do great things and you like just don't give up, like things start to happen. And for me, it's like it's a gift every day. So.
What are some of the words that you use to speak to these kids? Like yeah, obviously you shared what the chaplain said to you before, but what are the themes and what are the most powerful phrases that you use for some of the people you work with?
Yeah, I tell them that I tell them things in a way that most people probably wouldn't tell them. And what I mean by that is that, I tell them that like you don't need to feel like that you need to have it all figured out right now. I didn't discover what my purpose was until I was in my 30s. And so just know that, there's a reason for you to be here. You're not an accident, you're not worthless, and that, we're all miracles in a way. And it's like we all also have decisions to make in life, and the decisions you make determine ultimately where you're going to go. And I told them like you don't have to be a gang member because everybody around you is a gang member, and you don't have to go down that road like I went down to become successful. That you can actually do what you really want to do that's deep down in your heart that you're afraid to speak on. And I tie that into like my story, and I tie that into my struggles and where I've been, and even talk about like my wounds, my physical wounds, the things that I've experienced, because I want them to know that despite the prison, despite the homelessness and the drug addiction and the getting stabbed and all these things, like, I stand before you today, somebody who is successful. And so why can't you do it? Like, and so I think it's, what I say, but it's more so of me tying it into my life experiences, and I think that within that, they can identify that there's hope. And people just need hope sometimes. And I think that that's kind of the spark to get them to, start doing things differently.
Mhm.
Yeah.
If if you could go back to 13-year-old Carlos, whose
Mm-hmm.
dad had just left, who didn't have the confidence to speak up, and give 13-year-old Carlos advice, what would you say to him?
Yeah, that's a good question. And um, I've been asked that question when I was in prison. People used to ask me that question, and I always, you know, struggle to really just come with a definitive answer of what I would tell, and because I truly feel that, at that point in my life, nothing nobody would have told me could have changed who I was going to become.
Mhm.
And I mean, even if it was even if it was me going back then and being like, "Hey, I'm your older self. Don't do this, don't do that." I feel that he was so lost, that he wouldn't have listened. And so
Mhm.
I think what I would have said was to just this like, don't let Chris kill himself. Like,
Mhm.
don't do that. Like, don't,
Wow.
if you don't do anything else, just don't let that happen. So I think that's one thing I wish I can go back and change that I can't.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I'm I'm the woo-woo crazy lady who has
Mhm.
obviously been through like an insane journey of
Yeah.
my own. I firmly believe, and this might just be my own need for survival. But when I wrote that question,
Yeah.
I had a different thought as to like how I would answer it. Like if I was to go back to 29-year-old Christy, who was about to marry my husband Brian, who'd just been given a 6-month death sentence, not knowing what was to come over the next 14 years. I firmly believe that we choose our journey before we get here. And I know a lot of people disagree with that. So part of me feels very much like this journey to get to where you are at right now, my journey to get where I'm at right now, other people who have had horrible, awful things
Yeah.
to them happen for a reason. So you can come out on the other side, discover your purpose, and be a light worker for others out there. And I very much consider you a light worker doing what you're doing right now, try and help so many people. It's like the answer about Chris is devastating and beautiful at the same time, but it feels like this is what you chose to go through, or had, like, not you, Carlos,
Yeah.
but maybe your soul had to go through this in order to come through and be this powerful of an inspiration for people. I don't know. It might sound like crazy talk, but it's like sometimes it's the only way that I could get through the day.
Yeah. No, I completely understand that. And in a sense, that's kind of like how I feel. As much bad as I've done in this world, like back then, I can never do enough now to make up for that. But I'll spend the rest of my life, making amends, not to make up for that, but just to fulfill the person that I was always meant to be. And
Yeah.
had I not went through all that, I couldn't be, I couldn't have the impact that I have today had I not been through all that. So I agree on that.
Okay,
Yeah.
two more questions.
Yeah.
So knowing again, like we're talking about a lot of the things that nobody tells us, and you have absolutely, I mean, shed light on so many different incredible things. So thinking about somebody who might be really struggling right now, or just pondering, is this worth it? I don't know. I don't want to, I'm gonna load the barrel with 2 bullets. What would you say to them?
I would say that to find your why, right? Find your why outside of yourself, because I get not caring about yourself. I get not, wanting to live your life. I get all that, but find somebody, right, or something that needs you, right? Somebody or something that needs you, and just make it through one more day for them, and go on for them first, and in time, eventually you will learn to love yourself, the way that you might even love others, and maybe it's not even a person. Maybe it's something in your mind that you feel like that you need to do. Let that be your why to get you through another day, but know that you do have a reason to be here. You just have to figure out what that is, and you can figure out what that is, and you could do that with the help of others. Like, don't be afraid to ask for help, because asking for help is it's actually the opposite of selfish. It's like you ask for help, you let other people know that they have value, and so you're actually doing a service for them. So if you don't know what to do, and if you don't know where to start, reach out and get help. And I'm a person that gets calls all the time from people, families, parents that tell me that their kids are at that point, and they ask for my help, and I go in and I try to do everything I can. And I'm not the only one. There's so many other people that will give you help and will help you to overcome what you're going through, but you have to be willing to ask for help. And if you don't want to do it for yourself, do it for somebody that loves you and cares about you, or some dream or something that keeps you going and keeps you moving, because sometimes you have to start there.
Mm-hmm. That is so beautiful. And thank you for sharing that. So thinking about where people can get in touch with you, where can they find you, find your book, find if they want to hire you, they wanted to ask you a question, where are all the places that they can find Carlos?
Yeah, so I got a website. It's called www.howtobattle.com. And that links to everything, my book, my social media, my coaching programs, all the work I'm doing and stuff is on there. I'm on Instagram at How to Battle, YouTube at How to Battle, and my book's on Amazon. It's called The Price. Um, but yeah, How to Battle is key. If you want to find me on any social media platform, and then the website is How to Battle. So that'll link to everything if you want to find me. And I'm always giving out, like I'm doing motivational stuff all the time on my YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and all that. Just continuously giving as much as I can out. So even if, you don't want to directly work with me, or you don't want to directly, or you're not there yet, just, listen to the stuff that I post, because a lot of that stuff that I post is things that may help you get through one more day. It may be something you need to hear to spark something in you. And so, I give out a ton of free content on there, life advice and coaching and stuff like that, inspirational, motivational content. You could find it there. Maybe there's something there that you can find some hope and inspiration in. And if it's not me, then somebody else, So everybody's going through some type of battle. And I think that, we all can overcome that if we just get the help that we need to do it. And there's somebody out there that can help you. And that's what I've learned through my journey is I wouldn't be who I am today without the support of others. So reach out and get your help from whoever you feel you can get it from best.
Thank you so much, Carlos.
Thank
Truly,
you.
this has been one of the most incredible conversations I feel like I've ever had. And I hope that I've done your story justice, and that so many people get in contact with you to just continue to doing the work that you're doing so beautifully. And your story is such an incredible inspiration for everyone, myself included. So I just want to say thank you for being so open about everything in your life so far.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be able to tell my story, and to be able to be here to have this discussion with you. So,
Of course. Well, that's it. Another episode of What Nobody Tells Us. I hope you learned something. I hope you felt something. And I hope you feel empowered to go start a conversation with somebody who you know might be going through something that you don't understand. Lean in. Don't peace out. Thanks so much for spending some of your day with me today. I really, really love that you did that. If you want to reach out, if you got an idea for an episode, you just want to give me some feedback, or just say, hey, do so at Nobody Tells Us on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, or X, whatever we're calling it these days. No one knows. Reach out, Christy at nobodytellsus.com. Shoot me an email there, or visit my website, www.nobodytellsus.com. Until next time, see you later.